If you invested $10,000 in nvidia 2 years ago, you'd have just over $100,000 today. You heard that right, and things are just getting started. The global artificial intelligence market is expected to 12x in size over the next 8 years, which is a compound annual growth rate of almost 37%. That's 3 times higher than the S&P 500's average rate of return over the last 15 years. And in this video, I'll go over the best AI funds to buy and hold forever, so that I win no matter which companies come out on top. That's the best way to get rich without getting lucky. Your time is valuable, so let's get right into it. First things first, I'm not here to hold you hostage, so here are all 4 funds I'm going to talk about, and there are timestamps so you can jump around. But let me point out 3 quick things before you do. First, this isn't a random list of AI funds and stocks like you see in many other videos. I picked these 4 funds specifically because of how they overlap, to give me more weighting to the best AI stocks on the market while still staying diversified. Second, this isn't some be-all and end-all list of funds. Think of it as a solid foundation for portfolios of all sizes in 2024 and beyond. And it's fine to add other ETFs or individual stocks on top of this list. And third, I'm not a financial advisor. My background is in electrical engineering and data science, and I have about 10 years of industry experience using AI to solve real-world problems. That's why every fund I'll talk about takes advantage of this massive AI wave, and I'm sharing my research for educational purposes only. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's dive into the first fund. The advice I always hear is to put some money into the market every month, which usually means buying a fund that tracks the S&P 500. The S&P 500 is a basket of the 500 largest US public companies, and the bigger the company, the bigger its stock's position in the basket. But 500 companies is a lot, so the S&P 500 grows slow and steady, even when its biggest holdings go on massive runs. For example, the top 5 companies in the S&P 500 are Microsoft, Apple, nvidia, Google's Class A and Class C shares combined, and Amazon. Besides Apple, all of these companies have been crushing it all year. Microsoft is up by 20% so far, Google is up a whopping 32% so far this year, Amazon is up more than 51% in the last 6 months, and nvidia, which is the stock I've covered non-stop over the last 3 years, is up by an insane 156% this year alone. But even though all of these massive market winners sit at the very top of the S&P 500, the fund is only up by 15% so far this year. And just to be clear, 15% is an amazing 6-month return, especially when you factor in how safe and diversified the S&P 500 actually is. But that's also way above its average annual rate of return of 12.6% over the last 15 years. On the other hand, the Nasdaq 100 grew by an average of 19.4% per year over that same time frame, or roughly 50% more per year than the S&P. And even though the S&P grew by 26% in 2023, the Nasdaq absolutely crushed it, growing by 54% over the same time frame. That's more than twice the returns during one of the best years in stock market history. Now here's the thing. The top 5 holdings in the Nasdaq are exactly the same as the S&P. Microsoft, Apple, nvidia, Google's Class A and Class C shares combined, and Amazon. Yet the Nasdaq 100 has outperformed the S&P 500 in 12 of the last 15 years. That's because it has 3 specific advantages in my opinion. First, it doesn't hold companies from the financial sector like banks. As a result, it's filled with more tech-focused companies that are positioned to benefit from this huge AI boom. Second, the Nasdaq holds non-US companies, like ASML, which is a Netherlands-based company that makes the massive lithography machines that companies like Intel, Samsung, and TSMC use to make the most advanced chips on Earth. And third, it tracks 100 companies instead of 500. 100 is still a lot of diversification, but not so much that the Nasdaq can't make big moves, making it a great fund to get rich without getting lucky or sacrificing too much security along the way. And speaking of security, I recently found out that dozens of online data brokers were selling my personal data. If you've been getting more spam phone calls, texts, or emails lately, they might be selling yours too. That's why I decided to join Delete Me, the sponsor of this video. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information from hundreds of online data brokers. You just sign up, Enter your information and let their experts get to work. They've reviewed over 32,000 listings for me so far. After 7 days, you'll get a detailed privacy report that shows you everything they've removed. I just got my 4th report, and Delete Me removed over 300 pieces of my personal information. And it's not just my name and address, but my fiance's and my mom's too. But here's the best part. They'll keep scanning these websites even after they remove your information. And I even get my own privacy advisor if I want to talk to a real person and make a custom removal request. So if you care about your data and your family's privacy, you can get 20% off any consumer plan with my code SYMBOL20 by going to joindeleteme.com/symbol20 or by using my link in the description. And thank you to Delete Me for supporting the channel and keeping my family's data safe. Alright, while the NASDAQ is a great foundation of 100 tech companies, the rest of these funds are much more targeted. So the obvious question is, how can we pick the right target markets so early into this new AI-based technology cycle? Well, we can look at an awesome case study on the cycle that we just went through. This is a chart from Morgan Stanley that looks at how different kinds of stocks performed during the rise of the mobile internet. I've shown this chart in previous videos, but you know what they say. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I really think that this case study could help identify the kinds of companies that will win big in this new era of generative AI. The first big takeaway is that the mobile internet evolved over a very long time. For example, this chart starts in 2010, but the first iPhone actually came out in 2007, and Apple's App Store started in 2008. It took 3 years for the iPhone to disrupt BlackBerry, reach mass market adoption, and change the way that businesses and consumers think about mobile computing. Likewise, this chart ends in 2016, but 5G didn't even start rolling out until 2018, and tons of new mobile-first online-only apps and services launched during the lockdowns of 2020 and 2021. So even though we've all heard about generative AI by now, I still think we're in the BlackBerry era of what could be a decade-long tech cycle. So there's no need to rush into any specific investment. And while high-margin software and service companies usually make for the highest performing stocks over the long term, they're actually the last part of any tech stack to make money, since they all run in data centers or on devices at the edge, like smartphones and tablets, laptops and desktops, and soon self-driving cars and humanoid robots. And before the infrastructure and devices powering these software platforms can make big moves of their own, semiconductor companies need to build the chips that power them. So instead of trying to predict the biggest AI winners a decade from now, some of which may not even exist yet, I can get broad exposure to these 3 key AI markets: semiconductors, hardware infrastructure, and software. That's exactly what these next 3 funds are targeting, and how they all fit together. My top choice for semiconductors is the VanEck Semiconductor ETF, ticker symbol SMH, which tracks the largest chip companies listed on major US exchanges. I really like this ETF for a few key reasons. First, it only tracks 25 companies, so this is a very targeted fund. The top 5 companies are nvidia, Taiwan Semiconductor, Broadcom, AMD, and ASML, all stocks which I cover very often on this channel, and they make up about 51% of this fund, with nvidia having around a 20% weighting all on its own. That's quite concentrated, which is why I started with the NASDAQ 100, and I'm using SMH to get even more exposure to semiconductors on top of that. And just like the NASDAQ, SMH is passively managed, which means it has a fairly low expense ratio of just 0.35% per year. But the fund itself has returned around 54% year to date, around 70% over the last 1 year, and a whopping 370% over the last 5 years. In fact, this fund has a long history of high performance. If you invested $10,000 into SMH when it was created at the end of 2011, you'd have over $200,000 today. And the next few years look just as good for semiconductors, since the global AI chip market is expected to more than 11x in size over the next 9 years, which works out to a compound annual growth rate of over 31% through 2033. That makes SMH a great way to capture that growth and get rich without getting lucky. Remember, huge growth happens when existing companies already have the perfect platforms for new or quickly growing markets. In this case, semiconductor companies are building chips to train and power large multimodal models and AI agents like OpenAI's GPT-4o, Anthropic's Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and Google's Project Astra, which is built on top of Gemini, while new chip competitors are still ramping up. That's why this fund has outperformed most individual stocks on the market. Investors need to understand that these foundational models are just as much the infrastructure for the next generation of AI-based software applications as the physical hardware that they run on, which is why the next fund on my list is Roundhill's Generative AI Technology ETF, ticker symbol CHAT, which tracks a little over 50 companies actively involved in 4 different areas of generative AI. Platforms are the companies developing, training, and commercializing AI tools that third-party developers can use to build their own applications, products, and services. Infrastructure companies provide the IT hardware and the chips for generative AI workflows, like we just discussed. And enterprise and consumer software companies are building generative AI applications for other businesses and direct to consumers, respectively. That's why companies like nvidia, Microsoft, Google, and Meta Platforms sit at the top of this fund. All of them have giant ecosystems filled with services and applications for end users, as well as software and hardware infrastructure for other companies to build on top of. One thing I really like about this particular ETF is that it's not over-allocated to software companies beyond the biggest tech giants. AI software startups have been dropping like flies as GPT, Claude, Gemini, and Llama keep getting more capable, and they end up cannibalizing businesses that add simple features, like tutoring or translation. My guess is that the next Microsoft, or Google, or Facebook hasn't been created yet, and it's a little too early to find the winners and losers at the very top of the AI stack. Chat comes with a 0.75% annual fee, making it the most expensive ETF on my list. But unlike the previous 2 funds, Chat is actively managed, which also means it diversifies the way that our stocks get rebalanced. This fund first launched in May of 2023, which also makes it the youngest ETF on this list, but it's returned around 40% since inception and 23% year to date. And like I said at the start, the global artificial intelligence market is expected to 12x in size over the next 8 years, which is a compound annual growth rate of almost 37%, split between hardware, software, and services, which makes Chat a great ETF to consider for capturing all that growth. But there is one software market that is already benefiting from this AI boom right now, which is where the 4th fund on my list comes in. So if you feel I've earned it, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. That really helps me out, and it lets me know to put out more content like this. Thanks, and with that out of the way, let's talk about the 4th fund on my list. Since the launch of ChatGPT, there's been a 12-fold increase in phishing attempts because emails, texts, and even videos can be generated with the push of a button. There's been a 75% increase in data theft and extortion, and AI has even enabled build-your-own ransomware subscriptions that cost next to nothing compared to the damage that they can cause. This is why, as much as every company is investing in AI right now, there's one part of their budgets they will never cut, and that's cybersecurity. The global cybersecurity market is expected to more than double over the next 8 years, which would be a compound annual growth rate of 11%. But the global cloud security market is expected to 6x over that same time frame, which means it should grow around twice as fast. I'm showing you multiple charts here because cybersecurity is many different things, just like artificial intelligence is actually many different things. For example, access management and authentication is about ensuring that only the right people can move around a given network. Identity protection is about protecting an individual's information from getting stolen. That's where Delete Me fits in, but for your personal data on the open web instead of a company's servers. Endpoint protection is about securing laptops, tablets, and phones, but not necessarily their users. And as generative AI keeps evolving, I think that every single one of these individual cybersecurity markets will grow even faster than people predict, since there will be new kinds of devices, apps, and data that need to be secured, new kinds of hacking techniques and malware, new rules and regulations for what data security even is, and probably just way more cyber threats in general. So to capture that growth, I picked the Wisdom Tree Cybersecurity Fund, ticker symbol WCBR, because I really like their stock picking strategy. The top 10 holdings inside WCBR make up over half of the fund, and it includes companies like HashiCorp, Palo Alto Networks, CrowdStrike, Datadog, Zscaler, and Tenable. Looking at this fund's documentation, which I always recommend reading, I can see that WCBR holds 25 companies at a time, 20 of which have a broad selection of products and services that fit at least 3 of the 8 cybersecurity themes that this fund focuses on, and 17 of the companies in this fund have a compound annual revenue growth rate exceeding 20%. I can even see a broad snapshot of why specific companies were chosen and given higher weights inside the fund. The reason I care so much about understanding the methodology for managing this fund is because I'm not a cybersecurity expert myself. So I see WCBR's 0.45% expense ratio as the price to offload the cybersecurity research and rebalancing to the specialists advising this fund, which further diversifies this 4-fund portfolio in terms of stock selection and management. Alright, I know this video is a little long, but I wanted to be thorough since ETFs take some careful consideration: the stock selection, rebalancing strategy, and management fees for each ETF. The number of holdings and their weights, and how each fund's holdings overlap are all important, especially if you're making multiple funds work together. You need to think of your portfolio as a whole, not just evaluate each fund individually. Speaking of which, you probably noticed that the first 3 funds all hold a lot of nvidia stock, even though they target very different markets. As a result, nvidia ended up being over 60% of my personal portfolio until just a few weeks ago. So if you want to know why I ended up selling a solid chunk of my position and how the rest of my stocks are doing, check out this video next. Or if you want to see my top 10 stocks to get rich without getting lucky, then this video is for you. Either way, thanks for watching, and until next time, this is ticker symbol U. My name is Alex, reminding you that the best investment you can make is in you.